Have you ever met a man who couldn't stop thinking about you after just one conversation, that one interaction where something clicked, and suddenly he was texting, calling, wanting to see you again? What was it about you that captured his mind so completely? It wasn't your appearance alone. It wasn't your words. It was something far more powerful, something operating beneath the surface of conscious awareness. When was the last time you noticed a man's eyes change when he looked at you? That moment when his expression shifts from casual interest to complete fascination. There's a psychological mechanism at work in these moments that 99% of women have never been taught. You've been told it's about being pretty enough, about saying the right things, about being available but not too available. All wrong. The truth about what makes a man obsess over a woman lies in the unconscious mind, the hidden realm that Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychological thinkers, spent his life studying. Ask yourself this: why do some women seem to effortlessly attract devoted attention while others remain perpetually unseen? The answer isn't found in magazine tips or dating advice columns. It's found in understanding the male psyche at its core. Men are driven by psychological forces they themselves rarely understand, forces that operate beneath their awareness, yet determine who they become intensely attracted to and who they merely appreciate from a distance. What if I told you that when a man becomes crazy about a woman, he's not seeing her at all, he's seeing something inside himself? This is the first profound truth you must understand. In Jungian psychology, this is called projection, the unconscious tendency to see your own unacknowledged traits in another person. A man carries within him what Jung called the anima, his inner feminine counterpart. This isn't about gender stereotypes. This is about psychological wholeness. Every man has qualities society labeled as feminine that he's disconnected from: emotional sensitivity, intuition, receptivity, nurturing capacity. These aspects don't disappear, they get buried in his unconscious mind. And here lies the key. When a man meets a woman who somehow activates this buried inner feminine, who somehow embodies qualities he's lost connection with, something electric happens. He experiences a recognition so profound that it feels like destiny. It feels like finding something he's been searching for his entire life. This isn't casual attraction, this is obsession. The moment you understand this mechanism, everything changes. You stop trying to be what you think men want. You start understanding what they unconsciously need. Consider this. Have you noticed how the woman a man becomes obsessed with often doesn't match what he claims to want? The man who says he wants someone easygoing and simple falls madly in love with a complex, challenging woman. The man who values logical thinking becomes captivated by a woman who trusts her intuition. This contradiction exposes the gap between his conscious preferences and unconscious needs. His unconscious is always seeking wholeness, seeking the parts of himself he's lost connection with. But here's where it gets complicated. Not every expression of his buried feminine side creates attraction. Some expressions create discomfort or even repulsion. Why? Because the anima exists in layers. Jung identified 4 developmental stages of the anima, each representing different aspects of the feminine within the male psyche. The first level is purely instinctual and biological. Eve, the mother of life. When a man's anima is fixated at this level, he sees women primarily as nurturers or objects of desire. The second level is romantic and aesthetic. Helen of Troy, the perfect feminine beauty. Here, women become idealized but not truly known. The third level brings wisdom and spiritual meaning. Mary, who brings devotion and depth. The final level is Sophia, transcendent wisdom that integrates all aspects of the feminine, where a man's psychological development has stopped, determines what qualities in a woman will create that electric recognition. This explains why some men are only attracted to women who mother them, why others chase physical beauty with no regard for character, why some need women to be mysterious and spiritually oriented, and why the rarest men appreciate women as complete human beings. Ask yourself, which version of the feminine does he need to recognize in you to feel that soul-stirring attraction? But there's another element at work, the shadow. Jung defined the shadow as the part of ourselves we refuse to see, the denied, repressed aspects we're unwilling to acknowledge. Every man carries a shadow, parts of himself he's been told aren't acceptable, vulnerabilities he can't admit, needs he can't. When a woman unconsciously recognizes and accepts a man's shadow, when she sees the parts of him that others miss or reject, a profound psychological safety is created. He feels known. Not just the acceptable surface self he shows the world, but the complex, contradictory being underneath. This recognition creates a psychological intimacy more powerful than any physical connection. Think about the last time a man couldn't stop talking to you. What were you reflecting back to him in that moment? What part of himself did you allow him to see or express? The truth is, what makes a man crazy about you isn't who you are, it's who he becomes in your presence. Does he feel more authentic, more seen, more understood? Or does he feel judged, inadequate, uncertain? The relationship between a man and a woman forms what Jung called a psychological container, a space where transformation becomes possible, where both people have the opportunity to reclaim disowned aspects of themselves. This container can be healing or harmful, creative or destructive. Which are you creating? Consider the archetypes, universal patterns Jung identified in the human unconscious. When a man meets a woman, he's not just meeting an individual, he's encountering archetypal energies that have moved through human consciousness for millennia. The mother, the maiden, the enchantress, the queen, the wise woman. These aren't roles to play. They're authentic expressions of feminine energy that exist within every woman in different measures. When a man encounters a woman who authentically embodies archetypal energies he unconsciously needs, the attraction transcends the ordinary. It becomes primal, magnetic, irresistible. But here's the psychological trap. Most women fall into trying to be what they think men want, rather than embodying their authentic archetypal energies. The moment you start performing, you lose power. The unconscious recognizes authenticity and rejects pretense. A man may be initially drawn to the persona you present, but he'll never become obsessed with a performance. The obsession-level attraction only happens when he encounters something genuine, something that speaks to his unconscious needs. This is why some women who break all the conventional rules of attraction still drive men wild. Their authenticity creates a psychological opening that manufactured behaviors never can. Ask yourself, what authentic archetypal energies do you naturally embody? Where do you become manipulation and performance? The distinction matters more than you know. Now let's address the mirrors. Jung believed that relationships serve as mirrors, reflecting back the contents of our unconscious minds. When a man becomes obsessed with a woman, he's often seeing the projected image of his own soul. This projection creates a powerful emotional charge, what Jung called the hook for our projections. Every quality that extremely attracts or repels you in another is showing you something about yourself. For a man, the woman who hooks his projections becomes numinous, seeming to glow with an almost supernatural significance. He can't stop thinking about her. Everything she does seems meaningful. He analyzes her words, remembers her gestures, finds himself thinking about her at odd moments. This isn't just attraction, this is psychological possession. But there's a danger here. When the projection eventually falls away, as all projections must, disillusionment follows, the magical quality disappears, the obsession fades, unless something deeper has been built. This explains the common experience of a man being wildly interested then suddenly distant. The projection shifted. The unconscious recognition faded or transferred elsewhere. To create lasting attraction, you must understand how to work with his projections without becoming defined by them. How to use that initial psychological opening to create genuine connection. The unconscious mind communicates through symbols, not logic, through emotional resonance, not rational understanding. When you grasp this, you understand why trying to convince a man to feel attraction never works. The unconscious doesn't respond to arguments, it responds to resonance. What resonates with the male unconscious? Authenticity, presence, psychological safety balanced with mystery, the dance between belonging and becoming, the permission to be both strong and vulnerable. Men are starved for spaces where they can be psychologically whole, where they don't have to fragment themselves to be acceptable. When a woman creates this space, not through calculation but through her own psychological integration, she becomes irreplaceable. Think of relationships as psychological ecosystems. Some combinations of psyches create barren deserts. Others create lush gardens where both people flourish. What type of ecosystem are you creating? The unconscious mind is constantly seeking integration, wholeness, what Jung called individuation. This drive toward psychological completion underlies all human behavior, including attraction. When a man meets a woman who facilitates his individuation, who somehow helps him become more psychologically complete, the attraction becomes compelling beyond reason. This isn't about mothering him or fixing him. It's about creating a relationship dynamic where his fragmented self can begin to reassemble. The woman who makes a man crazy about her is often the one who helps him reconcile his contradictions, who accepts his complexity without trying to simplify him, who sees his darkness without fear and his light without envy. She becomes the alchemical vessel for his transformation. And this brings us to one of Jung's most powerful insights. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Most attraction operates unconsciously. Most relationships form and dissolve based on unconscious factors neither person understands. But what happens when you bring consciousness to this process? Everything changes. When you understand the unconscious forces driving attraction, you're no longer at their mercy. You can work with these forces rather than being worked by them. You can create attraction intentionally rather than accidentally. Consider the concept of psychological complementarity. Jung believed that we're unconsciously drawn to people who represent our unlived aspects, who embody qualities we've neglected in ourselves. This explains why opposites often attract, why the structured, organized woman finds herself drawn to the spontaneous, creative man, why the logical thinker falls for the intuitive feeler. Each sees in the other something they've lost connection with in themselves. But complementarity alone creates attraction, not lasting connection. For that, you need psychological compatibility, shared values, communication styles, life visions. The rare combinations of both complementarity and compatibility create the relationships that transform both people. What if you could consciously create this combination? The first step is self-knowledge. Understanding your own psychological makeup, your dominant functions, your shadow aspects, the archetypes you naturally embody. The second is developing your capacity to see others clearly, to recognize their unconscious patterns without judgment. With these two capacities, you can create connections that satisfy both the unconscious need for complementarity and the conscious need for compatibility. This is the psychological framework for attraction that transcends chemistry and circumstance, that creates not just interest, but obsession. Think about the last man who couldn't get enough of you. What were you reflecting back to him? What part of himself was he recognizing in you? Now imagine developing this capacity intentionally, learning to see and interact with the male psyche at this profound level of understanding. This isn't manipulation. It's psychological artistry. It requires abandoning simplistic notions of attraction and embracing the complex reality of the unconscious mind. It means developing your capacity to read psychological currents that most people never notice. When you understand that attraction happens in the unconscious before it registers in conscious awareness, you stop wasting energy on surface-level strategies that never create deep impact. You start operating at the level where attraction actually forms. The unconscious speaks in symbols and responds to symbols. A gesture, a glance, a moment of unexpected honesty. These can create more psychological impact than the most carefully constructed appearance or conversation. Why? Because they bypass conscious defenses and speak directly to the unconscious mind. Think of it as psychological bypass, creating a direct channel to the parts of him that make decisions about attraction before his conscious mind even registers what's happening. This explains why sometimes the smallest moments create the strongest attractions, why a 10-second interaction can sometimes create more impact than hours of conversation. It's not the duration that matters, it's the psychological depth. When you touch something essential in a man's unconscious, when you create that moment of recognition, time becomes irrelevant. The impact can last days, weeks, even years. Men who experience this level of psychological recognition often describe it as not being able to get her out of my mind or thinking about her all the time. They're describing psychological possession when an encounter has activated something so significant in their unconscious that it continues working in them long after the interaction ends. This is the hidden mechanism behind what makes a man crazy about a woman. But there's more to understand. The unconscious operates on paradox in ways the conscious mind struggles to comprehend. For example, the more you try to make someone attracted to you, the less authentic psychological connection becomes possible. Yet the more you embody your authentic self, the more naturally you create the conditions for profound attraction. Or this paradox, complete acceptance of a man creates safety, yet without challenge, attraction fades. Complete challenge creates growth, yet without acceptance, connection dies. The mastery lies in holding these opposites, creating both safety and challenge, both acceptance and growth. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites, allowing contradictory truths to exist simultaneously without resolving them prematurely. This capacity to hold psychological tension without collapsing into simplistic solutions is profoundly attractive to the male psyche. Most people rush to eliminate psychological tension. They seek comfort over growth, certainty over mystery, simplicity over complexity. But the unconscious thirsts for the full spectrum of experience, for integration of all aspects, not just the easy ones. The woman who can hold this psychological tension, who can contain contradictions without being overwhelmed by them, creates a unique form of attraction. She becomes a psychological cathedral, a space large enough to hold all aspects of the masculine without fragmentation. This is the foundation of what makes a man not just attracted, but obsessed, psychologically captivated, beyond rational explanation. And it begins with understanding yourself at this same level of psychological depth. with becoming intimate with your own unconscious patterns before attempting to interact with his. Ask yourself, how well do you know the contents of your own unconscious mind, your shadows, your projections, your authentic archetypal energies? This self-knowledge is the prerequisite for creating the profound psychological attraction we're discussing. Without it, you'll continue operating from the surface, creating connections based on personas rather than authentic psychological resonance. With it, you'll develop an almost uncanny ability to create attraction that other women can't explain or replicate. Because they're working at the level of behavior, you'll be working at the level of the unconscious mind. They're using strategy. You'll be creating psychological alchemy. This is the fundamental distinction that separates women who occasionally attract interest from women who consistently inspire obsession. One is working with surface techniques. The other is working with the fundamental structures of the male psyche. Which will you choose? Which will you choose? The woman who creates obsession-level attraction understands something crucial about the male psyche, something that brings us to the core of Jung's most misunderstood concept, the shadow. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. These words from Jung reveal the psychological truth that transforms casual attraction into consuming obsession. The shadow contains everything we refuse to see in ourselves: our denied aggression, our unacknowledged desires, our hidden vulnerabilities. The parts of ourselves we've been told are unacceptable. For men, this shadow often contains qualities society deems unmasculine: emotional insensitivity, uncertainty, need for nurturing, fear of inadequacy. These don't disappear when denied. They go underground, shaping behavior in ways most men never recognize. When a woman somehow creates space for these shadow elements to emerge safely, something profound happens in the male psyche. He feels known. Not just his acceptable social self, but the complex contradictory being underneath. This creates psychological intimacy, more powerful than any physical connection. Ask yourself, when was the last time you witnessed a man drop his usual persona around you? That moment when the practiced social mask slips and something more authentic emerges. What happened in that moment? Most women miss these critical psychological openings. They see a man's vulnerability and try to fix it. They encounter his contradictions and try to resolve them. They sense his shadow and try to improve him. All wrong. The shadow doesn't need fixing, it needs integration. Recognition without judgment. This is the psychological art that creates obsession-level attraction, the ability to witness a man's full complexity without trying to simplify him. Consider what happens when a man meets a woman who somehow sees both his light and his darkness without flinching, who acknowledges his contradictions without trying to resolve them, who creates space for his shadow to emerge without shame. He experiences a form of psychological acceptance he may never have known before. The world constantly demands that men fragment themselves, be strong but not intimidating, confident but not arrogant, successful but not threatening, vulnerable but not weak. An impossible set of contradictions that creates perpetual psychological tension. Most men spend their lives trying to cram themselves into these contradictory expectations, never feeling fully authentic or accepted. Then they meet a woman who somehow creates space for their whole self, who doesn't require them to fragment or perform, who sees their shadows without fear and their light without envy. This woman becomes irreplaceable, not because of her appearance, not because of what she does, but because of the psychological space she creates. What makes a man obsessed with a woman is not who she is, but who he becomes in her presence. Does he feel more whole, more authentic, more fully himself, or does he feel judged, inadequate, on guard? This is why the conventional advice about attraction fails so spectacularly. It focuses on surface behaviors rather than psychological dynamics, on what women should do rather than who they should be. The truth is, what creates obsession-level attraction isn't a technique, it's a capacity, the capacity to contain psychological complexity without being overwhelmed by it. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites, the ability to allow contradictions to exist without prematurely resolving them, to recognize that truth often exists not in either or, but in both. A man can be both strong and vulnerable, both confident and uncertain, both independent and needing connection. The woman who can hold these psychological contradictions, who can create space for a man's full complexity, activates something profound in the male psyche. She becomes, in Jung's terminology, an anima figure, an external representation of his own inner feminine, his soul image. Not because she performs this role, but because she authentically embodies qualities he's seeking integration with. This is not about becoming what you think men want. It's about becoming so psychologically integrated yourself that you naturally create space for others' integration. It's about developing what Jung called the container function, the capacity to hold psychological complexity without being destabilized by it. How do you develop this capacity? By first facing your own shadows, by becoming intimate with your own psychological complexity before attempting to interact with his. Ask yourself, what parts of yourself do you deny? What emotions do you refuse to feel? What aspects of your nature have you been told are unacceptable? These denied aspects don't disappear, they go underground, emerging in projection onto others. This is why some women are perpetually attracted to the same type of problematic man. They're encountering their own unintegrated shadow, externalized in another person. The same mechanism operates in men. Their unintegrated aspects create powerful attraction patterns they rarely understand. What if you could recognize these patterns? What if you could see beyond surface behavior to the unconscious dynamics creating a man's attraction? You'd possess a level of psychological insight few women ever develop. Consider the common experience of a nice guy who's attracted to women who treat him poorly, or the successful man who's drawn to women who undermine his confidence. These aren't random preferences, they're unconscious patterns seeking resolution. The unintegrated shadow always seeks expression, often through attraction to someone who embodies our denied qualities. This explains why opposites often attract initially, yet face significant challenges in creating lasting connection. The very qualities that create powerful initial attraction, the embodiment of our unlived aspects, can become sources of conflict when integration doesn't occur. The shadow dance of attraction follows predictable patterns. First, the projection phase, where we see our unlived aspects in another person and feel powerful attraction. Then the disillusionment phase, where the projection starts to fade and we see the actual person beneath our projections. Finally, the integration phase, where projection is withdrawn and replaced with genuine relationship. Most attractions never reach this third phase. They remain stuck in projection and disillusionment, creating the familiar cycle of intense attraction followed by disappointment. But what happens when both people understand this process? When they can consciously work with these psychological dynamics instead of being unconsciously driven by them, everything changes. The relationship becomes a vessel for mutual growth and integration rather than a series of projections and disappointments. This is the foundation of what Jung called conscious relationship, where both people see beyond their projections to the actual person beneath. Such relationships are rare because they require significant psychological development from both parties. The capacity to withdraw projections, to distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to the other, to recognize when you're reacting to your own shadow material rather than the actual person before you. Most people never develop these capacities. They remain caught in unconscious patterns, attracting and being attracted to people who embody their unintegrated aspects. But those who do develop these capacities create connections of remarkable depth and longevity. The ability to see beyond projection to the actual person is perhaps the greatest skill you can develop in creating lasting attraction. This doesn't mean projection disappears entirely. Jung believed projections are inevitable, but conscious relationship requires the ongoing work of recognizing and withdrawing these projections as they occur. Think about the last time you were intensely attracted to someone. What qualities did you see in them? What emotional response did they evoke in you? Now ask yourself, what aspects of yourself might you have been seeing in them? What denied or unlived parts of yourself were they embodying? This process of questioning your own attractions, of bringing consciousness to unconscious patterns, is the beginning of psychological integration. And this integration changes everything about how you experience and create attraction. Instead of being driven by unconscious forces, you begin to operate from conscious awareness. Instead of repeating familiar patterns, you create new possibilities. This shift from unconscious projection to conscious relationship is what makes lasting attraction possible. But there's more to understand about the shadow dance of attraction. The shadow contains not just our denied negative qualities, but also our disowned positive potential, our unclaimed gifts, our unlived greatness. Jung called this the golden shadow, the positive qualities we've denied in ourselves that we then project onto others. This explains why so many people diminish themselves in relationships. They project their own capabilities, intelligence, or creative potential onto partners, then feel perpetually inadequate in comparison. It also explains why some people can't sustain attraction to someone who sees their full potential. Their own insecurity makes such recognition unbearable. The woman who makes a man crazy about her often sees his unlived potential, not just who he is now, but who he could become, not as a project to fix, but as a potential already present, waiting for recognition. This distinction is crucial. Trying to improve someone creates resistance. Recognizing their inherent potential creates resonance. One pushes against their current state, the other draws forth what's already there. This capacity to see beyond current limitations to inherent potential is profoundly attractive. It creates a psychological space where growth feels natural rather than forced. But there's an important caveat. This recognition must be genuine, not strategic. The unconscious instantly recognizes manipulation and withdraws in response. The shadow dance of attraction requires authenticity above all else. The moment you try to strategically activate someone's projections or shadows, you've left the realm of genuine connection for manipulation. The unconscious always knows the difference. This is why techniques that attempt to manipulate attraction inevitably fail or create dysfunctional connections. They may trigger initial interest, but never create lasting obsession. True obsession-level attraction emerges from authentic psychological resonance, from creating the conditions where both people can become more whole in each other's presence.
This brings us to another crucial aspect of the shadow dance: psychological safety versus challenge. Complete psychological safety without challenge creates comfort, but kills attraction. Complete challenge without safety creates growth, but kills connection. The alchemy lies in creating both simultaneously, initiation A psychological space that feels safe enough for vulnerability, yet challenging enough for growth. Jung observed that we grow primarily at the edge of our comfort, in the tension between the known and unknown, security and challenge. The woman who creates obsession-level attraction instinctively understands this balance. She creates psychological safety through acceptance, while offering challenge through her own boundaries and authenticity. She doesn't try to make herself smaller to accommodate his insecurities. She doesn't abandon her truth to maintain peace. She stands firmly in her own complexity while creating space for his. This combination, psychological safety with challenge, creates the optimal conditions for both growth and attraction. Consider how different this is from conventional dating advice that encourages women to make men comfortable, to avoid conflict, to accommodate their preferences. Such approaches may create temporary comfort, but kill attraction in the process. The shadow dance requires movement between different psychological states, between comfort and challenge, known and unknown, connection and autonomy. This dance creates psychological aliveness that static approaches to attraction never can. Think about the relationships that have most transformed you. Were they always comfortable, or did they challenge you to grow beyond your current limitations? Growth and transformation emerge from the productive tension between security and challenge. What Jung called necessary suffering, the capacity to create this productive tension, nesses to challenge without threatening, to accept without enabling means, is what separates women who inspire lasting obsession from those who create only temporary interest. But this capacity can't be faked. It emerges from your own psychological integration, from having done the inner work to become comfortable with both light and shadow, both connection and autonomy. This is why the foundation of creating obsession-level attraction isn't about techniques, but about personal development, but about becoming psychologically whole yourself before attempting to create wholeness with another. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This process of becoming grit, of individuation, is the true work behind creating profound attraction, not because it makes you more attractive in conventional terms, but because it develops the psychological capacities that allow you to engage with others at the level of the unconscious mind. Consider how rare these capacities are. How few people develop the self-awareness to recognize their own projections, the psychological strength to face their shadows, the emotional maturity to create both safety and challenge. These capacities aren't taught in conventional education. They aren't developed through ordinary socialization. They emerge only through conscious effort, this through the deliberate work of psychological integration. This is why some women seem to effortlessly attract devoted attention, while others remain perpetually unseen, not because of physical appearance or social status, but because of psychological development. The woman who's done her inner work naturally creates conditions that the unconscious mind responds to, not through calculation but through authentic being. This authenticity is what the male psyche hungers for, minus a woman who isn't performing or manipulating, but simply being her complete self, with all her complexity and contradictions. Such a woman becomes compelling beyond explanation, not because she's perfect, but because she's real in a world of performances and personas. The shadow dance of attraction reveals this counterintuitive truth. What makes a man crazy about a woman isn't her perfection but her authenticity, her willingness to be fully herself without apology or performance. This authenticity creates psychological trust, the foundation of profound connection, not trust that you'll never hurt each other, but trust that you'll be real with each other. This trust allows the unconscious to open, creating the conditions for integration and growth. Without this trust, the unconscious remains defended,
creating the familiar pattern of initial interest followed by withdrawal. The ability to create psychological trust, make it safe for the unconscious to open to, is perhaps the most powerful capacity you can develop in creating obsession-level attraction. This trust isn't established through words, but through presence, noticed through consistent authenticity that the unconscious recognizes and responds to. The unconscious is constantly scanning for inconsistencies, for gaps between words and energy, between claims and behavior. When it detects these gaps, it withdraws trust and closes. This explains why some women create powerful initial attraction that quickly fades. Their unconscious inconsistencies trigger withdrawal at the level of the unconscious mind. The woman who creates lasting obsession maintains unconscious congruence, noticed alignment between her external expression and internal state. This congruence creates a feeling of solidity, of trustworthiness that operates beneath conscious awareness, not because she's perfect, but because she's genuine. The male psyche craves this authenticity precisely because it's so rare. In a world of performance and manipulation, the authentic woman becomes irreplaceable. This authenticity isn't about revealing everything or lacking boundaries. It's about psychological integrity, being the same person consistently, rather than shifting personas to please others. The shadow dance of attraction requires this consistency as its foundation. Without it, trust never develops at the unconscious level, and projection remains the dominant mode of interaction. With it, projection gradually gives way to genuine relationship, to seeing and being seen beyond the veils of projection and persona. This is the foundation of obsession-level attraction that endures beyond the initial phase of projection and idealization. But developing this level of authenticity requires facing aspects of yourself you've been avoiding, your shadows, your contradictions, your psychological complexity. It requires integrating denied aspects rather than projecting them, owning your full range of emotions rather than expressing only those deemed acceptable. This process of integration, of becoming psychologically whole, is what creates the foundation for profound attraction, not because it makes you more acceptable, but because it makes you more real, not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you authentic. The shadow dance of attraction reveals this paradox. What makes you most attractive isn't becoming what others want, but becoming fully yourself. With all your contradictions and complexities, this fullness of being creates a psychological space where others can experience their own wholeness, where they can reclaim disowned aspects of themselves through relationship with you. This is the alchemy of attraction, the transformation that occurs when two people create the conditions for mutual integration and growth. But this transformation requires something from both parties, the willingness to face what they've been avoiding in themselves, to recognize their projections and shadows, to move toward integration rather than remaining fragmented. Without this willingness, relationships remain stuck in unconscious patterns of projection and disillusionment. The familiar cycle of intense attraction followed by disappointment. With it, relationship becomes a vessel for mutual transformation, what Jung called the container of psychological growth. This container isn't created by accident. It's created through conscious intention and consistent authenticity. Through the deliberate cultivation of psychological capacities that most people never develop. The woman who creates obsession-level attraction has developed these capacities not to manipulate others, but to create conditions where genuine connection becomes possible. She understands that lasting attraction isn't about techniques, but about presence, is about who you are, rather than what you do. This presence isn't static, it's dynamic, responsive,
alive to the moment. It holds contradictions without collapsing them. It creates both safety and challenge. It invites growth without demanding it. This quality of presence, minds, this capacity to hold psychological complexity without being overwhelmed by it, is what separates women who create lasting obsession from those who create only temporary interest. And it brings us to the final aspect of the shadow dance, the integration that occurs when projection is withdrawn and replaced with genuine relationship. And it brings us to the final aspect of the shadow dance, the integration that occurs when projection is withdrawn and replaced with genuine relationship. This integration, this psychological transformation, is where lasting obsession takes root. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Jung's insight reveals the pathway from projection to integration, from obsession to lasting connection.
When a man becomes crazy about a woman, he's initially responding to his own projections, seeing in her the disowned aspects of himself. This creates powerful attraction, but remains unstable. True transformation begins when those projections are gradually withdrawn and replaced with genuine seeing, not seeing the idealized woman of his unconscious fantasies, but the actual woman before him, complex, contradictory, authentically herself. This withdrawal of projections doesn't diminish attraction, it transforms it from the unstable intensity of projection to the grounded depth of genuine connection. From obsession with an image to commitment to a person, this transformation doesn't happen accidentally. It requires specific psychological conditions that most relationships never create. First, psychological safety. The unconscious only reveals itself in environments where it feels secure, where vulnerability isn't exploited, where authenticity is valued over performance. Second, conscious awareness. The capacity to recognize projections as they occur, to distinguish between what belongs to you and what belongs to the other, to see beyond your own psychological material to the actual person before you. Third, mutual willingness to grow. The shared commitment to integration rather than fragmentation, to facing discomfort rather than avoiding it, to transforming unconscious patterns into conscious choices. When these conditions are present, something remarkable happens. The relationship becomes a vehicle for individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming psychologically whole. Instead of endless cycles of projection and disappointment, both people experience progressive integration. They reclaim disowned aspects of themselves. They become more complete human beings, and paradoxically, this psychological completeness creates more powerful attraction than projection ever could. The question becomes, how do you create these conditions? How do you transform unconscious obsession into conscious connection? The process begins with self-knowledge, with developing intimate familiarity with your own psychological landscape before attempting to navigate another's. Ask yourself, what aspects of yourself do you project onto others? What emotions trigger you most intensely? What criticism feels most personally wounding? These triggers reveal your shadow, the disowned aspects of yourself seeking integration. When you understand your own shadow, you can recognize when you're projecting it onto others, when you're reacting to your own disowned material rather than the actual person before you. This self-knowledge creates the foundation for withdrawing projections, for seeing beyond your own psychological material to the actual person. But self-knowledge alone isn't enough. Integration requires active engagement with your disowned aspects, the deliberate reclaiming of parts you've been avoiding. Jung called this shadow work, the process of facing and integrating denied aspects of yourself. This work transforms not just your relationship with yourself, but with others. As you reclaim your projections, you become capable of seeing others more clearly, of creating connections based on genuine seeing rather than projection. The woman who creates lasting obsession understands this principle. What makes a man crazy about you initially is what you represent in his unconscious. What makes him stay is who you actually are. The transition from obsession to lasting connection requires facilitating this movement from projection to genuine seeing. How do you facilitate this transition? First, by maintaining psychological safety, even as projections begin to fade. When a man's idealized image of you starts dissolving, as it inevitably will, his unconscious faces a choice: retreat into another projection or move toward genuine relationship. The determining factor, whether you create conditions where his unconscious feels safe enough to choose growth over retreat. This safety isn't created by being perfect or fulfilling his every desire. It's created by consistent psychological congruence, by being the same person outwardly that you are inwardly. The unconscious recognizes this congruence instantly. It registers as trustworthiness at a level beneath conscious awareness. With this trust established, the unconscious becomes willing to risk vulnerability, to gradually withdraw projections and move toward genuine relationship. Second, by maintaining your own psychological integrity even when it creates tension. The withdrawal of projections inevitably creates discomfort. The fantasy image dissolves, revealing the actual person beneath. Many women respond to this discomfort by attempting to conform to the projection, by trying to become what they sense the man wants, rather than remaining who they actually are. This strategy always fails. It replaces authentic connection with performance, creating relationships based on personas rather than genuine selves. The woman who creates lasting obsession maintains her psychological integrity even when it creates temporary discomfort. She refuses to fragment herself to accommodate another's projections. This integrity paradoxically creates more powerful attraction than conformity ever could. It establishes her as psychologically real rather than a projection screen for another's fantasies. Third, by creating conditions for mutual growth. Integration doesn't happen in isolation. It occurs in relationship, in the dynamic exchange between two psyches. The relationship that facilitates transformation creates a container large enough to hold both people's full complexity. It values growth over comfort, authenticity over performance, genuine seeing over fantasy. Such relationships are rare precisely because they require significant psychological development from both parties. The capacity to withdraw projections, to tolerate contradiction, to face discomfort rather than avoiding it. Most people never develop these capacities. They remain caught in cycles of projection and disappointment, creating the familiar pattern of intense attraction followed by disillusionment. But those who do develop these capacities create connections of remarkable depth and longevity, relationships that continue evolving rather than stagnating. The question becomes, how do you develop these capacities? How do you create the psychological foundation for transformative relationship? The process begins with integration of your own masculine and feminine energies, what Jung called the animus and anima. Every human psyche contains both masculine and feminine aspects, regardless of biological sex. Psychological wholeness requires integrating both, rather than identifying exclusively with one. For women, this often means reclaiming their inner masculine, their capacity for boundaries, assertiveness, independent thinking, analytical reasoning. Many women suppress these qualities, fearing they'll appear unfeminine or threatening. They project their masculine aspects onto men, creating relationships of dependency rather than interdependence. The woman who creates transformative attraction has integrated her masculine side. She doesn't need a man to express these qualities for her because she embodies them herself.
This integration paradoxically makes her more attractive to the masculine, not less. It creates the foundation for relationship between two whole beings, rather than two fragmented halves. For men, integration means reclaiming their inner feminine, their capacity for emotional receptivity, intuition, relatedness, aesthetic appreciation. Many men suppress these qualities, fearing they'll appear weak or unmasculine. They project their feminine aspects onto women, creating relationships of imbalanced need rather than mutual exchange. The man capable of lasting connection has integrated his feminine side. He doesn't need a woman to express these qualities for him because he embodies them himself.
This integration creates the foundation for seeing a woman as she actually is, rather than as a carrier of his projected feminine. The relationship between two psychologically integrated people creates something extraordinary, a container for mutual transformation rather than mutual projection. Instead of using each other to express disowned aspects of themselves, both people bring their whole selves to the relationship. This completeness creates more powerful connection than dependency ever could. The woman who inspires lasting obsession understands this principle. The foundation of transformative relationship isn't neediness, but wholeness. Not what you lack, but what you've integrated. This integration doesn't mean becoming androgynous or denying gender differences. It means becoming psychologically complete, embodying the full spectrum of human qualities rather than a fragmented subset. This completeness creates what Jung called the temenos, a protected psychological space where transformation becomes possible. Within this space, both people continue evolving. They face their shadows together. They withdraw projections as they arise. They move progressively toward individuation, toward becoming their complete, authentic selves. The relationship that creates this temenos becomes not just personally meaningful, but psychologically transformative. It changes not just how you feel, but who you are. This transformation occurs through specific psychological mechanisms that Jung identified. First, the confrontation with the shadow, facing denied aspects of yourself that relationship inevitably activates. All intimate relationships eventually trigger your shadow material. The question isn't whether this will happen, but how you'll respond when it does. Most people react unconsciously, blaming the other person for their discomfort, ending the relationship when it becomes challenging, or employing psychological defenses to avoid facing what's being activated. The relationship that facilitates transformation uses these activations as opportunities for integration. Instead of blaming or avoiding, both people recognize when shadow material is arising and work consciously with it. This shared commitment to facing shadow material creates remarkable psychological intimacy. Instead of performing acceptable personas for each other, both people reveal and work with their authentic struggles. Second, the integration of the animus ladeus, reclaiming projected aspects of masculine and feminine energy. As relationship progresses, both people have opportunities to withdraw these projections and integrate the qualities they've been seeing in the other. This integration transforms attraction from dependency to appreciation, from needing the other to express your disowned qualities to appreciating them for who they authentically are. This shift creates relationships of remarkable stability and depth. Instead of the volatile intensity of projection, both people experience the grounded depth of genuine connection. Third, the activation of the self, Jung's term for the organizing center of the psyche that transcends the ego. While the ego concerns itself with social adaptation and conscious identity, the self represents your complete psychological potential, what you're capable of becoming when fully individuated. Transformative relationships activate this deeper level of the psyche. They speak not just to who you are now, but to who you're capable of becoming. This activation creates what feels like destiny or meant to be, the sense that the relationship is serving a purpose beyond conscious intention. Jung believed these feelings indicate that the self, not just the ego, is engaged in the relationship, that it's serving the purpose of individuation, of becoming your complete, authentic self. The woman who creates transformative attraction understands this principle. What makes a man crazy about you isn't just who you are, but who he becomes in your presence. Does the relationship activate his full potential or diminish it? Does it facilitate his individuation or obstruct it? This understanding shifts everything about how you approach attraction. Instead of focusing on techniques or appearances, you focus on creating psychological conditions where transformation becomes possible. These conditions include psychological safety balanced with challenge, acceptance of current reality coupled with vision of potential, the security of belonging with the freedom of becoming. Creating these conditions requires significant psychological development few people ever achieve. Most remain caught in unconscious patterns, creating relationships that repeat familiar dynamics rather than facilitating transformation. But those who do this developmental work create connections of extraordinary depth and longevity. They become irreplaceable, not because they're perfect, but because they create conditions where both people can continue evolving. The practical application of these Jungian principles transforms not just your understanding of attraction, but how you create it. Instead of focusing on surface behaviors, you focus on psychological dynamics. Instead of trying to become what you think men want, you focus on becoming your authentic self. This authenticity creates a psychological resonance that techniques and performances never can. It speaks directly to the unconscious mind, creating attraction that operates beneath conscious awareness. Consider the specific ways this understanding transforms your approach to creating attraction. First, it shifts your focus from doing to being, from what you do to create attraction to who you are. Most conventional advice focuses on behaviors, what to say, how to act, what to wear. This Jungian approach focuses on psychological development, on becoming the kind of person who naturally creates conditions for profound connection. This shift from doing to being transforms not just your results, but your experience. Instead of constantly performing to create attraction, you focus on your own integration and authenticity. Second, it transforms how you handle men's projections. Instead of trying to fulfill their fantasies, you focus on creating conditions where they can gradually withdraw projections and see you as you actually are. This withdrawal of projections doesn't diminish attraction but transforms it, from the unstable intensity of obsession to the grounded depth of genuine connection. Third, it changes how you respond to challenges in relationship. Instead of seeing them as problems to solve, you recognize them as opportunities for integration, for both people to face shadow material and grow through it. This perspective transforms conflicts from threats to the relationship to catalysts for deeper connection, from something to avoid to something to consciously work with. Fourth, it shifts how you create attraction over time. Instead of trying to maintain an initial fantasy, you focus on creating conditions for ongoing evolution. The relationship that continues evolving never becomes stagnant. It maintains psychological aliveness that static relationships never achieve. These practical applications of Jungian psychology transform attraction from a manipulative game to a vehicle for mutual growth. From something you do to something you create with them. This transformation begins with your own psychological development, with becoming the kind of person who naturally creates conditions for profound connection, not because you're employing techniques, but because you've done the inner work to become psychologically integrated yourself.
This integration manifests in specific qualities that create powerful attraction. Psychological congruence, being the same person outwardly that you are inwardly. This congruence creates unconscious trust, the foundation of lasting connection. Authentic presence, being fully available in each moment, rather than distracted by internal narratives or future concerns. This presence creates psychological intimacy that partial attention never can. Emotional range, having access to your full spectrum of emotions rather than expressing only those deemed acceptable. This range creates emotional safety for others to express their authentic feelings. Personal boundaries, knowing where you end and others begin. These boundaries create respect that permissiveness never can. Inner authority, trusting your own perceptions and judgments rather than seeking external validation. This authority creates a psychological solidity that neediness never can. These qualities emerge naturally from psychological integration. They can't be faked or performed because the unconscious instantly recognizes inauthenticity. This recognition explains why techniques that attempt to manipulate attraction inevitably fail or create dysfunctional connections. The unconscious knows the difference between authentic presence and calculated performance. The woman who creates transformative attraction has developed these qualities not to become more attractive, but to become more whole. The increased attraction is a side effect of this wholeness, not its purpose. This distinction matters more than you might think. When increased attraction is your goal, you remain caught in external validation, in needing others' responses to feel adequate. When psychological integration is your goal, you develop a sense of inherent worth, independent of others' responses. This inner security creates a paradoxical effect. It makes you more attractive, precisely because you're not seeking validation through attraction. The practical path to developing these qualities involves specific practices that Jung and his followers identified. Active imagination, dialoguing with different aspects of your psyche to integrate disowned parts. Shadow work, deliberately facing and integrating denied aspects of yourself. Dream analysis, working with dreams as communications from the unconscious mind. Authentic expression, practicing radical honesty with yourself and others about your actual experience. These practices develop the psychological capacities that create transformative attraction, not as techniques to manipulate others, but as paths to your own integration. This integration transforms not just how others respond to you, but how you experience yourself. You become less fragmented, more whole, less reactive, more responsive, less driven by unconscious patterns, more capable of conscious choice. These changes naturally create conditions where profound connection becomes possible, not because you're trying to make it happen, but because you've become the kind of person who naturally facilitates transformation.
The ultimate paradox of Jungian psychology applied to attraction is this: the less you focus on creating attraction, the more naturally it emerges. The less you try to fulfill others' projections, the more profoundly they connect with who you actually are. This paradox reveals the fundamental distinction between manipulation and facilitation, between trying to control others' responses and creating conditions where authentic connection becomes possible. The woman who creates transformative attraction has shifted from manipulation to facilitation, from trying to make attraction happen to becoming someone who naturally evokes it. This shift changes everything about how attraction unfolds. Instead of the familiar pattern of intense beginning followed by disappointment, both people experience progressive deepening. Instead of diminishing over time, the connection continues evolving. This evolution occurs because both people are engaged not just with each other, but with their own individuation, with becoming their complete, authentic selves through relationship. Jung believed this mutual individuation creates the strongest possible bond between two people, not the enmeshed dependency of projection, but the conscious interdependence of two individuated beings. This bond transcends the conventional categories of attraction and attachment. It creates something Jung called kinship libido, connection based not on projection or need, but on mutual recognition of essential nature. This recognition creates a sense of belonging with another person that projection never can. Not belonging based on fulfilling fantasies, but on genuinely seeing and being seen. When a man experiences this level of recognition with a woman, his response transcends conventional attraction. He doesn't just want her, he recognizes himself through her. This recognition creates commitment that circumstances can't easily break, not because he's dependent on her, but because the connection facilitates his own becoming. The woman who creates this level of connection understands something crucial. What makes a man not just attracted but devoted is creating conditions where he can become more fully himself, not by trying to complete him or fix him or change him, but by creating a psychological space where his own integration becomes possible. This space isn't created by dimming yourself to make him feel adequate. It's created by embodying your own wholeness while making room for his. This combination, psychological completeness with spaciousness for the other, creates the optimal conditions for lasting devotion. Not the possessive obsession of projection, but the enduring commitment of genuine recognition. Not "I need you to complete me," but "I see you, and through you, I more fully become myself." This transformation, from projection to recognition, from obsession to devotion, is what Jungian psychology offers to our understanding of attraction. It reveals that what makes a man not just crazy about a woman, but committed to her, is not techniques or appearances, but psychological conditions that facilitate mutual becoming. Creating these conditions requires your own psychological integration, your willingness to face shadow material, withdraw projections, and move toward authentic being. This integration isn't a destination, but an ongoing process, a continuous movement toward greater wholeness and authenticity. The relationship that facilitates this process becomes not just personally satisfying, but psychologically transformative. It changes not just how you relate to others, but how you experience yourself. This transformation represents what Jung considered the ultimate purpose of intimate relationship, to serve as a vehicle for individuation, for becoming your complete, authentic self. When relationship serves this purpose, it transcends the conventional categories of romance and attachment. It becomes a sacred container for mutual becoming. This container requires consistent tending, the ongoing work of withdrawing projections as they arise, of facing shadow material when it emerges, of choosing authentic expression over comfortable performance. Few relationships ever achieve this level of psychological depth. Most remain stuck in projection and role-playing, creating connections based on personas rather than authentic selves. But those that do achieve this depth create something extraordinary, a bond that continues evolving rather than stagnating, that grows deeper over time rather than diminishing. This evolution occurs because both people are engaged with the fundamental Jungian project, making the unconscious conscious, bringing awareness to unconscious patterns, integrating disowned aspects, moving towards psychological wholeness. This shared commitment creates a unique form of intimacy, not just emotional or physical, but psychological. The intimacy of mutual witnessing as both people continue evolving. The woman who creates transformative attraction understands this principle. The most powerful connection isn't created by fulfilling fantasies, but by facilitating growth. Not by becoming what another wants,
but by creating conditions where both people can become who they truly are. This understanding transforms not just how you approach relationship, but how you experience yourself within it. Instead of fragmenting to accommodate another's projections, you continue the work of integration, of becoming your complete, authentic self. This authenticity creates a paradoxical effect. It makes you more attractive precisely because you're not trying to be attractive, more compelling because you're not seeking to compel. The final insight of Jungian psychology, applied to attraction, is this. What makes a man not just crazy about a woman, but devoted to her, is the experience of genuine psychological freedom in her presence. Not freedom from commitment, but freedom for authentic becoming. Not you can be whatever you want, but you can be who you truly are. This freedom isn't created by absence of boundaries, but by psychological spaciousness, by creating a container large enough to hold both people's full complexity without requiring fragmentation. When a man experiences this psychological freedom with a woman, his response transcends conventional attraction. He doesn't just want to be with her, he becomes more fully himself through the relationship. This transformation, from wanting to have to wanting to become, represents the ultimate goal of Jungian psychology, applied to attraction relationship as a vehicle for mutual individuation. Not the enmeshed dependency of conventional romance, but the conscious interdependence of two beings continuing to evolve together. This evolution doesn't happen accidentally. It requires deliberate creation of the psychological conditions where transformation becomes possible. These conditions include safety balanced with challenge, acceptance coupled with vision, the security of belonging with the freedom of becoming. Creating these conditions begins with your own psychological integration, with doing the inner work to become the kind of person who naturally facilitates transformation. Not because you're employing techniques, but because you've become psychologically whole enough to create space for another's wholeness. This wholeness isn't a static achievement, but an ongoing process, a continuous movement toward greater integration and authenticity. The relationship that facilitates this process becomes not just emotionally satisfying but psychologically transformative. It changes not just how you feel, but who you are. This transformation represents what both Jung and modern psychology consider the ultimate purpose of intimate relationship, to serve as a catalyst for becoming your complete, authentic self. When relationship serves this purpose, it transcends the conventional categories of romance and attachment. It becomes a sacred container for mutual evolution. Few relationships ever achieve this level of psychological depth. Most remain stuck in patterns of projection and performance, creating connections that repeat familiar dynamics rather than facilitating transformation. But those that do achieve this depth create something extraordinary, a bond that continues evolving rather than stagnating, that grows deeper over time rather than diminishing. This evolution occurs because both people are engaged, not just with each other, but with their own becoming, with the fundamental human project of psychological integration. The woman who creates transformative attraction understands this principle. The most powerful connection isn't created by trying to be what another wants, but by becoming so psychologically integrated yourself that you naturally create conditions for mutual growth. This integration isn't achieved through techniques or strategies, but through the ongoing work of psychological development, of making the unconscious conscious, integrating shadow material, withdrawing projections, and moving toward authentic being. This work never ends. It's not a destination but a journey, a continuous movement toward greater wholeness and authenticity. But each step on this journey
increases your capacity to create transformative connection. Not because you're employing techniques, but because you're becoming the kind of person who naturally facilitates growth. The ultimate insight of Jungian psychology applied to attraction is this: what makes you most compelling isn't what you do but who you are. Not your strategies, but your authentic being. This authenticity creates a form of attraction that techniques and performances never can. It speaks directly to the unconscious mind, creating resonance that operates beneath conscious awareness. When you understand attraction at this level of psychological depth, everything changes. You stop trying to become what you think others want and focus on becoming your authentic self. Not because authenticity is more attractive, although it is, but because it's the only path to psychological wholeness. This wholeness creates a paradoxical effect. It makes you more attractive precisely because you're not trying to be attractive, more compelling because you're not seeking to compel. The woman who makes a man crazy about her, who inspires not just temporary obsession but lasting devotion, understands this paradox. She's not trying to fulfill his fantasies but to create conditions where both people can become more fully themselves. This creation isn't a technique, but a capacity, a psychological development that emerges from your own integration. The question becomes not, what should I do to attract him? But who must I become to create conditions for mutual growth? The answer lies in your own psychological integration, in the ongoing work of becoming your complete, authentic self. This work isn't easy. It requires facing what you've been avoiding in yourself, integrating shadow material, withdrawing projections, moving beyond comfortable patterns into new possibilities. But each step on this journey increases your capacity to create connections of extraordinary depth and longevity, relationships that continue evolving rather than stagnating. This evolution represents the ultimate promise of Jungian psychology applied to attraction, not just intense beginnings, but enduring transformation. Not just being desired, but being truly seen. The choice is yours. Will you continue operating at the level of strategy and technique? Or will you engage with attraction at the level of psychological depth, creating conditions where both you and others can become more fully yourselves? The answer to this question determines not just who you attract, but who you become through the process of attraction. Choose wisely.